And welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Hello, Ray. How are you?
I'm good, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing good. And we have got Cindy Kelly back with us. She was with us a month or so ago, and we had to cut her off kind of in the middle of her presentation, and we want to hear the rest of the story. So, Ray, if you have anything to say before Cindy gets going, let's go ahead.
Well, I'll just say thank you, Cindy, for agreeing to come back and to do it right on the end of a flight coming in off of a good time that you've had during the holidays. And just to remind our folks that are watching us now, we were talking with Cindy and had talked about her experience at the Department of Energy and other things that she'd done. And of course, she's the founder of the Atomic Heritage Foundation. And we were talking primarily up until then, we had gotten to the point about the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. And we were running out of time. So I interrupted Cindy and asked her if she would agree to come back. And she has. So Cindy, we'll just let you go ahead and share your screen, pick up where you were before, and just keep going, if that's all right.
Be happy to. It's really wonderful to be back, and I can hardly stop myself from talking about the Manhattan Project and the wonderful things that we worked together on. This was, I must say, at the outset, it was a great collaborative effort. It was a work of tens of thousands of us. So it seemed, I mean, it was tens of thousands at the time. And for those of us working on this project, we couldn't have done it without each other being fully on board. So that's a major lesson. If you want to get something done, do it with Ray Smith and Keith McDaniel and their allies.
We had a lot, a lot of people pulled out and helped us for a number of years. I mean, it took literally 10 years or more to get it done. And we couldn't have done it without everybody pulling together. I agree with you there.
Absolutely. Okay, well, to pick up where I left off, let's see if this works. We had this rogues gallery of people who were absolutely instrumental at the outset of getting this project, that is the Manhattan Project National Historical Park, started. And every park begins with what they call a special resources study. You can't just ask the Park Service to designate your the view out your backyard as a park so you can keep it preserved as this beautiful bucolic view, if you're so lucky to have such a view. You have to have the Park Service weigh in that this property is worthy of being preserved for the national interest. So in September of 2003, Senator Bingaman here, senator from New Mexico, along with Maria Cantwell, senator from Washington State, and other co-sponsors such as Lamar Alexander of Tennessee. Here is Pete Domenici, a very important person to this whole effort, very supportive from New Mexico. Doc Hastings is a congressman from Washington, but he wasn't just any congressman. He was chairman of the House committee that had jurisdiction over the national parks. So his support was key. And because he represented Hanford, where they reduced the plutonium and they were one of the signature sites of the Manhattan Project, he had a great interest in this, which was much to our good fortune. This is Tom Udall, who's now a senator. I guess he just retired, but he was a congressman at this time, which is almost 20 years ago. At any rate, this coalition, or I should mention, there's Patty Murray. She's a senator of Washington and chairman of the Budget Committee now. She was a very important person in all of this. They're both strong Republicans and strong Democrats who work together. I mean, this was 20 years ago, because it doesn't happen so much now, but it was absolutely critical to our success to have both parties represented and both people in the Senate and the House that were champions of this. So there were hearings in March and spring of 2004, and it was not necessarily a slam dunk that this proposal was going to go forward. In fact, President George W. Bush said there will be no parks under his administration, no new parks. So the person representing the Park Service, and I may have mentioned this last time, your editors can edit this out, who commented on the 5 different proposals for park or park enhancement, had to say, no, the Park Service was opposed to the first 4 proposals. When he got to the Manhattan Project, we were the last. He said, we're not opposed, which was a ringing endorsement, given the fact that the official administration position was we should not have any. So everybody kind of wanted this secretly, even if officially they couldn't embrace it per se. At any rate, so look at this date, September 2004. How long does it take to create a park? How long does it take to study whether there ought to be a park? Well, here's the man in charge. Let's see. At that time, it was Jonathan Jarvis. He was the director. Well, he became the director of the National Park Service in 2009. At the time of this study enactment, he was Pacific West region director. So he sat in San Francisco and had jurisdiction over Hanford. And all he had ever heard about Hanford was that it was very contaminated. And his thought was, we shouldn't go there. The National Park Service knows nothing about radioactivity. We don't want to put our rangers at risk. They feared that they would be liable for, that is, the Park Service would be liable for radioactive and toxic contamination. And frankly, they didn't want that. They didn't want any of it. So this was not a good starting point, but and the nominal 2-year study timeframe, it took 8 years. So it was very complicated because there were 4 sites they looked at. I mean, we all know of the first 3, Oak Ridge, Hanford, and Los Alamos. But to make things even more complicated, they threw in Dayton, Ohio, because the Senator DeWine wanted this on the list. It was where they produced polonium, which was used as a trigger for the bomb. So they had to look at 4 different sites, that is, the Park Service did, involving 4 different states and 4 different regional offices. So that's why it was so complicated. And took so long. And behind all this was a growing coalition at each of the 3 sites, Los Alamos, Hanford, and Oak Ridge. And then we pulled these together in a national coalition, which came together very nicely. And there were several hearings, both on the House and the Senate, and representatives from the communities, the 3 communities, testified and were very enthusiastic about it. All of this counts for a lot. This is absolutely essential to have the local communities supportive to get something through to Congress. It's very hard to do if the local community is not enthusiastic. So one thing that the Atomic Heritage Foundation did was to try to partner with each of the major sort of historical societies or organizations, nonprofit organizations in the communities. And this was a particular strong alliance between us and the Los Alamos Historical Society. When I first started, I had never seen the Oppenheimer house. This is a picture of the cottage up at Los Alamos. There had been a boys' school, and there were probably 40 or 50 boys, 7th grade to 12th grade, who learned to be men. They were given responsibilities for ranching, for taking care of a horse, learning how to ride, but also they had a very top-notch pre-college education, studying Greek and Latin and the classics and advanced math and all of that. So it was really quite an experience. And the school built these cottages very much like the one you see. They were all sort of stone and ponderosa pine and other natural materials from the area that were for the masters. They were for the faculty. And when the war came and Oppenheimer decided, hey, this is just the place I want my research laboratory to be, the senior scientists and top level military officials took over these cottages originally designed for the masters, for the top echelon scientists and military folks. And this was Oppenheimer's house. And Helene and Jerry Sudam, you can see them here, lived in that house starting in the early 50s. Oppenheimer left in 1945, and then there was another scientist who lived there, and then Saddam's took it over after that. He was a physicist at the laboratory, and she was an historian by training and became a very active docent for the Los Alamos Historical Society. And when I first met Helene, we had lunch, and I went with Nancy Bartlett, whom Ray knows, and Larry Campbell, both of the Historical Society. And I began to talk about her house and said, boy, wouldn't it be neat if someday it could be part of this new park, that it could be available? And she said, oh, well, that's an interesting idea. Have you seen it? And I said, no. She said, well, what are you doing after lunch? Let's go, I'll show it to you. And then her next question was, well, do you like sherry? And I said, well, of course, that would be lovely. So we sat down and we had one glass of sherry, and then she said, oh, how about another? And by the second glass of sherry, she said, you know what? I think we ought to donate this to the Historical Society. And while it didn't happen right there and then, Historical Society picked up on that and ran with it and got the lawyers involved. And soon they had a living trust agreement that assigned the house to the Historical Society, and now it's owned by the Los Alamos Historical Society. It's just one of those serendipitous moments where things happen, and such a generous spirit of these Saddams to donate that. It's going to be a wonderful resource for the ages. At any rate, this is all part of the history of how we got the park going. In order to, drum up, we're 10 years away from having a park enacted. We needed to get the key senators really enthusiastic about this. So we had Senator Domenici come and dedicate the Oppenheimer House. And this is all part of this Living Trust Agreement. And Jeff Bingaman opened the symposium we had on Oppenheimer. So this is Oppie with his pork pie hat. And in the foreground, you can see someone who claims to be a long lost relative, although the thread is somehow obscured a bit, a little bit obscured, but his name is Andy Oppenheimer. And he spoke as part of this centennial. But we also had Oppenheimer's grandchildren, Charlie Oppenheimer and Ellen, were there as part of this. Anyway, it was a very nice occasion. This V site if you watch part one, you'll know that it was very dilapidated and condemned to be bulldozed, destroyed. We were able to save it at the last minute, getting a grant from the Save America's Treasures program that had to be matched, just $700,000 grant. And the Los Alamos National Laboratory staff, John Isaacson and Ellen McGehee and their team, took it on and took on the restoration, and even found, see those are asbestos shingles, which were sort of one of the rationale that the laboratory had used to condemn it. They sought to figure out, how do we replace those that are need replacing, and they went to eBay, of course. So the lighter colored tiles there are asbestos shingles from eBay. At any rate, this is where the Trinity gadget, it was called, it was the plutonium bomb that was built for the test that was conducted in the Alamogordo area in the desert in south central New Mexico on July 16, 1945. Anyway, it's a very important building where that gadget was hung, suspended, you could just fit through these high bay doors, they're called, and it's a big hook on a chain that they suspended this so-called gadget from, this big 6-foot round cylinder to test it. At any rate, so we found that these symposia were so much fun. We had another one on creativity in science and the arts. So you recognize that this man here with the glasses on the left in the center is Richard Rhodes, who has been just instrumental in the success of the Atomic Heritage Foundation and our coalition's efforts to get a park. He opened a tremendous amount of doors to politicians and local leaders and the like, who lionized him, especially in Los Alamos, for his book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb, which won a Pulitzer in 1987. Here he is with Ed Grothus, who was a real character. He collected all kinds of discarded implements and instruments from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and had an old shopping like A&P, if you know that chain of stores. Anyway, something of that magnitude filled chock-a-block with all these things. It was called the Black Hole. And he was a real character, real personality. Anyway, the man on the far right with the smile and the beard is the composer, John Adams, who composed the opera Dr. Atomic, which is, about the Manhattan Project, focused on Oppenheimer and the first detonation of an atomic weapon. It wasn't used as a bomb, but the Trinity test. Very, very dramatic, incredible music. Anyway, I could go on, but actually this on the left, you'll see a scene from the opera, and in the shadow, that is the gadget. They replicated one on the stage. So we had, it's sort of, I'm just giving how we got from zero to a national historical park. And part of it was reaching out and doing things to bring in different members of the community and different interests, different national interests, people interested in opera, people interested in music, and so forth. So we also reached out to the B reactor. This is just friends at the console there in Hanford. We were able to get grants to develop some interpretation for the B reactor and with the B Reactor Museum Association, created 3D models of the reactor core and the whole area, and put a lot of short videos and together that are still used to help visitors who come to the reactor understand what happened there and how things work. And one of the nice things about all of this history is it has a backstory that's as equally important as the 1943 to 45 story. So at Hanford, the land was once the hunting, fishing, and camping grounds for 4 different tribes. And one tribe, the Wanapum tribe, you see Rex Bucks Jr. here, it was actually their home. So Rex Buck talked about what it meant to them, the land, and the fact that they were evicted from the land, and the kind of meaning the land has for them today. And other people who were evicted were this Bergman family, German family who came to plant orchards and raise other crops along the banks of the Columbia River. So this is part of the story of the agricultural pioneers who actually settled in the area that is now the Hanford Reservation. The reservation is absolutely huge. It's half as big as the state of Rhode Island. So there were a lot of farms and farmland that were condemned. This is picture again of the control. This is the then Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar, and the Senator Maria Cantwell and Doc Hastings, who were so critical to the passage of the act. And then, of course, an important partnership was with the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association, who had already done a lot of work to try to preserve the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant and the Alexander Inn Guest House and Chapel on the Hill. And that became a focus for the legislation, is to name particular properties that would be part of the new park. So the K-25 was what I suppose we worked on the hardest for 10 years. And this is Bill Wilcox with his classic bow tie. At our lunch, we had this, we called it lunch on the lawn. This is right on the front lawn of the K-25 building. Had like 250 people eating barbecue and celebrating this achievement. And we had bus tours, and all these things were to kind of get people excited about a possible Manhattan Project Park. And one of the things we did, this is kind of trying to introduce people who saw the K-25, let's say, as kind of a ruin and had planned to destroy it, that it could be a museum and a resource and a way to celebrate the history. So I kind of pulled together some slides to say, look what they've done to these mills and along the banks of the rivers in New England. They're gorgeous, really. The mill at Lowell, Massachusetts is now part museum and part condominiums. It's not too far north of Boston, so it's become a kind of commuter town, and it's been very successful. This is a museum now. This is called MoCA, Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. And when they took this, huge old warehouse, people said, "Oh, good grief, who's going to come?" Well, they're coming from New York City. It's not that far, 2 or 3 hours, and the same from Boston. And they can put in these art installations that you could never fit in a usual, regular size museum. So it's quite spectacular. This is another former mill. This one's in Minneapolis. It was the mill capital for flour capital of the country for many years along the Mississippi. It's called the Mill City Museum. Part of it is, and part of it is a wedding venue. These shots were taken probably 10 years ago, and it's now further developed, but just as fun. Bethlehem, who would have thought that an industrial site as dirty as a steel mill could be saved? But they've done it in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, putting together a amusement park. I don't have a good pictures of it to show, but they didn't tear it down. That one. Sorry, the one I just showed you is Emscher Park along the in the Ruhr Valley, the industrial valley in Germany, which they are preserving. So if you think that K25 and B and Beta 3 are big, these are even bigger. So what we learned is you got to stay open to new ideas and be ready for the long haul. These things don't happen overnight, but we shouldn't reject them because they're big. Size should be no object. And it's a way to preserve Oak Ridge's heritage and provide for its future. So that was the argument we made. Didn't quite work on the K25. We still have Beta 3 to try this approach on, see if we can make it work for that. But it's the K25 is demolished, but there's now a new K25 History Center. So those of you watching from Oak Ridge are probably well aware, have been there. It's really, I think, a very good representation of what happened there. It was planned. The plan was to make it much more expansive, and that's kind of not materializing as we expected, but it's still a nice museum. Excuse me. This was part of our sales job, trying to get the Department of Energy and others to embrace the idea of investing in saving some of these properties and how much private money is being invested in heritage tourism. So this was done by Gordon Fee, whom many of you know. And I'm sure these numbers now are much greater. This is, at least 10 years ago. But, and this was another slide I just pulled out of the past. How can Oak Ridge capitalize on its heritage? So these are things, you can look at them. Have they happened? Are they happening? So I did a light editing. This said aggressively support the Manhattan Project Special Resource Study. We actually now have a park, but I think the adage to support it is very apt, an important strategy to get to capitalize further on Oak Ridge's heritage. So anyway, what the Atomic Heritage Foundation turned to, in addition to preserving some of the properties and working on the park legislation, is to try to collect oral histories, realizing having firsthand accounts of people who worked on the project was, enormously important. So these, we found some oral histories that were buried in archives at Boston University, University of Washington and Seattle, that no one had access to. In Boston University, there were recordings, 70 of them, taken in 1965, of General Groves and Robert Oppenheimer, and a whole list of the top scientists, because it was only 20 years after the war and they're all still alive. So these, sorry about this phone, these oral histories were on a 3.5 speed tape. I wasn't even sure that we could hear them, that they were still, audible. But They were, and so they're now digitized and they're available to anyone on our website. We also have interviews that Richard Rhodes has taken for his work. Marty Sherwin, who wrote American Prometheus, he just unfortunately died, but his recordings of 70 or 80 key people of the Manhattan Project and Cold War era are on our website. And then we went around the country and took 350 interviews. I'd say, I don't know, 50, 70 in Oak Ridge, maybe more. So it's a treasure trove for journalists, scholars, documentary producers, and others. And the best news is we are going to be upgrading our website, that website and our other two websites, so they'll be easier to navigate. It'll be a little bit snazzier come next year. So that's the Voices site. That's what it looks like now. And Voices of the Manhattan Project. We may call it Voices of the Atomic Age, just because it spills over into the Cold War. I mean, most of these people lived and worked in the Cold War as well. And there's a lot of interest in looking at Cold War histories. Then we have another product called Ranger in Your Pocket. They're about 250 little short vignettes that visitors to the park can use on their cell phone to access, to find out who lived where, what happened in this building, and how it all worked. So there are several on Oak Ridge innovations that sort of bring it up to date, what's going on now in the laboratory, and how did the innovations that were started in the Manhattan Project continue over the decades. Finally, this is just to illustrate some of the selections you find when you go into Ranger in Your Pocket. And then we developed guides, the Manhattan Project sites, one for each of the major sites. And we have a anthology that I think Ray talked about earlier, that has reflections of veterans, and it's been updated this year to include, or last year, to include accounts by the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as survivors of the bomb. And then it has two pieces about how this subject is as real today as it was 75 years ago, that the threat of nuclear war is still with us. And the leaders of the world need to do something about this. So there's still a lot to think about. So I guess we're closing here with some further photos of our leaders who are very dear to us because they made it happen. Now retired, but hopefully still engaged and interested in the Manhattan Project, or some of them. We had a great collaboration. All these organizations, the National Parks Conservation Association, National Trust for Historic Preservation, pulled out all the stops. You know, if there was an issue, they would get letters out to every member in the House and every senator, get things lined up for this. ECA was very active as well. And that led us to the Manhattan Project National Historical Park, which is now for the ages. And it's up to those of us who care to keep working, keep supporting the Park Service, and complimenting what they're doing, as you are doing so well in Oak Ridge. So that's it.
Thank you, Cindy, very much. That was a really good history lesson on how you were involved so intimately with the creation of the park. And we've now seen that continue to develop over the last several years. And the future looks bright for that national park for sure. And again, we appreciate your involvement and your continued working with the Atomic Heritage Foundation. And of course, your partnership with the museum in Albuquerque, the Jim Walter and his effort working with you. I think getting that website upgraded is a good idea, and changing the names appropriate because it does have Cold War information there. Keith, anything you want to say to wrap us up?
Well, I wanted to ask Cindy a question.
Okay.
You may not know very much about it, or you may, I don't know. The film director, Christopher Nolan, who's a great film director, he's getting ready to make a movie about Oppenheimer. And do you know very much about it? Are you familiar with that process? And has anyone reached out to you, or?
Are you talking about the film that's being made based on American Prometheus?
It may be that but it's coming out, I think, in 2023 or something like that.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's with the actor Cillian Murphy, I think is his name. He's going to be playing Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes. Yes. Marty Sherwin and Kai Bird co-authored American Prometheus, which was the saga of Oppenheimer, his life. And sadly, Marty Sherwin died the day that he learned that actor was chosen
is that
for the
right?
role. Yes, he knew there was
Oh,
going
my
to be
goodness.
a film. So now it's up to Kai to kind of be the source of commentary or advice, I guess, on the film and whether they've captured the essence or whatever. He was such a complicated man that someone asked, if you had a room full of people and you asked, will the real General Grove stand up? One person would stand up and everybody would recognize right away, yeah, that's General Groves. If you asked, okay, let's have the real Robert Oppenheimer stand up, I mean, you could have 25 different people stand up and it would be right. Because he was so enigmatic and he was very charismatic, but he was he could be very acerbic and difficult to deal with. He could be wonderful and very thoughtful, the most humane person you'd ever met. He was a brilliant man, but had many dimensions of his character. So it'll be interesting to see how they interpret him.
And it's interesting. When I read about that, I was like, there's going to be so many people that are going to be judging the accuracy of this film. And it kind of reminded me of what Tom Hanks, a story that Tom Hanks told when they were making the series Band of Brothers. And he went to Dick Winters, who the series was really based around, and said, in this film, you're going to say things you never said, you're going to do things you never did, and you're going to go places you never went. He says, that's just the nature of filmmaking. He says, if we get 17% of it correct, he says, then we will be hailed as great historians because we got closer than anybody else ever has. So, I think a film about Oppenheimer is going to, the best that it can do is kind of represent an essence of who he was and an essence of the things that go around him. And it's not this is not going to be a documentary where, your major agenda is historical accuracy. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I know Christopher Nolan's a great filmmaker and this actor is a great actor. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do. Surely it's got to be better than that Paul Newman movie, that, what was the name of that, Ray?
Fat Man and Little Boy. I
Fat Man
guess.
and Little Boy. But anyway, so yeah, I was just curious if you knew very much about it, and obviously you know what's going on with it. So I figured you probably would.
Let me make a comment. This is the book that's being used to. I don't
Pull it
think I
back
can get
closer
it.
to you, Ray. Yeah,
There you go. Yeah, I'm learning how to do this. It takes a while, but this is the book that it's based on. Having met at least one of the authors, I'm very impressed with and read the book. I'm very impressed with what's in there. But as Cindy said, Oppenheimer was a very complex individual. They can't tell his full story, so they'll have to pull just pieces from it.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, I'm anxious to see it done. Anything that's done like that intrigues me, and I'm proud of the people that are doing it.
Yeah. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for being with us and for all the work that you have done over the last 20 to 30 years to get us to the point where we are. We are very grateful to you and your efforts. I know I speak for Ray and speak for a lot of people in Oak Ridge anyway. And thank you for all your work and all your effort that you've done.
Well, it's been, a pleasure. It's been a passion. I have really thoroughly enjoyed it and immensely enjoyed working with you and others. That's been the real reward of this. And I must put a footnote in saying it's been marvelous too, getting to know the Manhattan Project people themselves, having interviewed, hundreds of them, and also getting to know the historians. It's been a real treat. So hopefully this movie is going to be like Saving Private Ryan was for World War II preservation, that it'll galvanize national interest and awareness, and they all come running to Oak Ridge and Hanford and Los Alamos to see for themselves.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. Certainly hope so. All right, well, Ray, who do we have? Who do you have slated for us next?
We have been talking with Denise Kiernan, who wrote the book, The Girls of Atomic City, and she's agreed to come on and be with us. She's on the board, along with myself, on Cindy's Atomic Heritage Foundation board, and Cindy called a meeting on Zoom for us a few weeks ago, and it gave me the opportunity to talk to Denise, and she readily agreed to come and talk to us. So we'll set her up and we'll see her next time.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Cindy. And folks, thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you back here in a couple of weeks.